I wanted to do this video about options with triggering off-camera flash. Now, when you first get into it, it can seem kind of intimidating to begin with, but then expensive at the same time, because if you look on the market, there's all sorts of triggers and a lot of them are expensive. So the first one is obviously wireless triggers. And there are two types. There's manual triggers and TTL triggers. And the difference between manual and TTL, you can see from different videos that I've done. Now, TTL triggers are going to be typically more expensive than their manual counterparts, and that's because there's more engineering put into them, they have extra functions, so on and so forth. However, if you're comfortable with manual photography or manual flash, you should I highly recommend getting into that. You're going to have more control, it's cheaper, everything. However, if you look into third-party options, there are inexpensive alternatives to TTL triggers, just like my YN622C review that I've done. Now, the second is infrared triggers or IR triggers. Now, these are line of sight, to whereas the wireless trigger can really see through anything. They can go through walls or what have you, because the radio trigger sends radio signals. IR sends a little pulse of light, and the flash on the other end, the receiving end, has to be able to see this pulse of light. They can get quite expensive too. Canon's ST-E2 and Nikon's SU-800 are basically triggers you put on your camera, and then they speak to their flashes. And the price factor can get quite high, so that might not be the best option to go when you're first starting out. Now, the next option is Speedlights with built-in RT. Now, Canon has released within the last year the 600EX RT with the ST-E3 RT trigger. Now, it looks a lot like the ST-E2, where you can control everything from the top, but it's a radio trigger rather than IR. Now, that setup is going to cost you upwards of $1,000 just for one flash and an ST-E3. Now, that's quite expensive. 9 times out of 10, you're going to go for cheaper alternatives. The cheaper alternative is Yongnuo. They've come out with the YN, what is it? Brain fart here. The YN 563. Now, they can be triggered wirelessly with the YN 602 or 603 triggers. And that setup with one flash, one trigger will get you around under $100. So considerably less expensive, and you'll only need one trigger to fire however many flashes you decide you need. And then there's Master and Commander mode, and this is what a lot of you will end up doing, if not already. Now, Commander mode is simply the pop-up flash on your camera, and it will speak to your Speedlight and tell it when to fire. And it sends a little pulse of light, basically, and it gets it to do its thing. Now, both Master and Commander, they're both done through IR, so again, it's line of sight. If you can bounce your light, that's fine, but that's not always the case depending on what you're trying to do. Now, Master mode is when you take a Speedlight, put it onto your camera, and what it does is it basically sends a signal to your Speedlights and it tells them to fire. Now, the on-camera isn't really affecting your exposure, it's just speaking to the others. Now, this can be an expensive alternative because most of the lights that do this are top-end Nikon or Canon flashes. So they're going to cost you around $500 to $600 just for that Master on top. Now we're starting to go back in time prior to the trigger options. Now, this one is a TTL cord, and what the TTL cord is it basically one end attaches to your camera, the other end attaches to your TTL flash, or it could be manual if you choose. And it sends all the information as it would if it was onto your camera, and you can fire it wirelessly. Now, well, it's not technically wirelessly, but the great benefit to these is when doing event photography, you can hold the flash in one hand, camera in the other, and you can get the same off-camera look when you're taking photos of people. So this is great rather than the bang-on beam, and it just you know, that sort of flattens out the image. That's a great alternative, and they're considerably cheaper than TTL flashes. Then there's PC sync cords, and they're quite similar to the TTL cords, only they don't have the TTL option. And the downside to the PC sync cords is some cameras, typically the low ends and flashes, they don't have PC sync ports. If that is the case, then you can get a little adapter that you put onto the top of your camera or the bottom of your flash, or both, and you just connect with this PC sync cord. Now they're going to be a lot cheaper than the TTL. You can get them in various lengths from really short to, you know, 30 plus feet. And I use these quite often to piggyback flashes off each other so I can get them all firing at once. The downside to this is that you're creating a tripping hazard if you're setting multiple lights up all connected together. And if you wanted to connect them, you can get a little, it's basically a three-way adapter where you plug your 3 cords into, with the 4th going back to your camera, and everything will fire as it should. And the final one is optical slaves. Now, studio strobes, and I know that the Yongnuo flashes, they all have built-in optical slaves, and I love these because, you know, you don't need to get a whole stable full of triggers. You could just set them to their optical mode and let them read light. The downside to them is it's much like the IR, where if you can't bounce light, then you're going to have issues for the particular speedlights receiving the light to fire themselves. If you don't have either Yongnuo or studio strobes, which you probably won't if you're starting out, let's say you have an SB700 or a Canon 430EX2, they don't have these the optical triggers built in. So what you can do is, again, you can buy these little adapters. They're little squares, and they have an optical eye. You attach that to the bottom of your flash, you put it on your stand, and it will detect any pulse of light coming to it and fire the flash. I'm not sure on their sensitivity, as I've never used them. I know the Yongnuos are quite good, and I know studio strobes are quite good. So you'd have to try it out for yourself. That being said, they're really cheap, and it wouldn't hurt to spend 10-15 bucks if you think it would help you. So I hope that helps. Take a look at my blog. I've got all this information on there, and I've got pictures up there as well, so you can sort of see what it is that you're looking for. And don't forget to follow my blog. I've had this up for about a week, so you may get a heads up on videos that I'm going to be doing in the future. And make sure you let me know if you have any questions. Take care.